Let's jump right into this explainer. If you're a manager or maybe studying to become one, you already know the drill. Numbers are the absolute lifeblood of your daily routine. But what if I told you those KPIs and performance reviews aren't just measuring your reality, they're actually creating it? Today, we're uncovering the hidden sociological architecture behind the metrics we live by, drawing on some truly brilliant research by Wendy Nilsson Espeland and Mitchell L. Stevens. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the hidden engine of management. Look into what is commensuration. Explore the power of numbers. Discuss when metrics fail, and wrap up with becoming a mindful manager. Section 1. The hidden engine of management. Uncovering the metrics we live by. Look, every single manager faces the exact same struggle. Decision-making is incredibly complex, and honestly, it gets overwhelming fast. You're bombarded with totally different types of information, so to make sense of the chaos, you naturally turn to numbers. But think about it. How do you compare the value of an expert rockstar coder to something abstract like a brilliant team culture? You're constantly forced to weigh things that seem entirely unrelated. Like, how do you stack an employee's raw technical output against their knack for mentoring junior staff, or the hard cost of new software versus the morale boost of a team retreat? To make these literally impossible comparisons happen, you're using a very specific mechanism. And that mechanism? It's called commensuration. Now, officially, this is the expression or measurement of characteristics normally represented by different units according to a common metric. So whether it's a utility score, a price tag, or your standard cost-benefit KPI, commensuration is simply the tool we use to transform qualities into quantities. It literally takes things that are fundamentally completely different and forces them onto the exact same spreadsheet so you can actually make a choice. Moving to Section 2, what is commensuration? Let's get into the mechanics of measurement. Whenever you create a metric, you're essentially walking through 3 distinct steps. First up, you discard information and context. Say you're tracking the number of calls a customer service rep makes. To get that number, you're intentionally ignoring the emotional nuance or the difficulty of each individual call. Second, you absorb uncertainty. The messy, complicated real-world experience is completely stripped away to create a simplified numerical proxy. And third, you organize what remains into new forms. So you take all those stripped-down calls and magically turn them into an efficiency score. Which brings us to a crucial, highly interpretive point. Quantifying performance isn't just about counting what's sitting right in front of you. As the research notes, commensuration can be understood as a system for discarding information and organizing what remains into new forms. This means you, or the system designers, are making highly intentional choices about what to ignore just to make mechanized decision-making possible. You're literally throwing the context out the window just so the math can work. Section 3. The power of numbers, tracking this from ancient philosophy all the way to modern capitalism. You see, this deep desire for rationality is exactly what built the corporate structures you're managing today. Way back in the 4th century BCE, the Greek philosopher Plato argued that commensuration was absolutely essential for structuring ethical choices and getting rid of irrational passions. Fast forward to 1867, and Karl Marx saw abstract labor, basically measuring work and time, as the ultimate commensurator that turns everything into a commodity. Then, in the 1900s, George Simmel analyzed how money creates this weird objective distance between us and the things we value. And by the 1920s, Max Weber was pointing out how rational capital accounting depersonalized business and essentially built the modern bureaucracy as we know it. As Simmel pointed out, all of this creates the calculating character of modern times, where people become obsessed with measuring, weighing, and calculating. The forms we use to measure value, like money, 5-star ratings, or utility, can actually insert a massive wedge between us and the very things we're trying to evaluate. Think about it for a second. Does staring at an employee's 4.2 engagement score actually connect you to that person? Or does it kind of distance you from their real lived experience at the company? Of course, organizations rely on these standardized metrics for very strategic and honestly political reasons. They're used to manage uncertainty, impose control, and, appear highly rational and objective. But here's the kicker. They're also used to limit managerial discretion. By forcing every decision through a strict quantitative model, organizations enforce order and actually limit the power of individual judgment. It creates what sociologists call mechanical objectivity, meaning authority is based on strict adherence to the numbers rather than your own personal expertise. Which leads us to perhaps the most mind-bending takeaway of this entire explainer. Metrics do not just describe reality, they create it.
When you define a metric, you are literally constructing a new reality. If you create a metric to define the optimal worker, guess what? Your employees are going to contort their behavior to become that exact statistical creation. You aren't just passively observing the bottom line anymore. Your metrics are actively altering human behavior to fit the mold you just designed.
Section 4. When metrics fail. Let's look at the boundaries of quantification. We see a pretty stark contrast in our organizations today. On one side, you have commensurate values. These are the things that fit neatly into a spreadsheet, like prices, utility functions, performance rankings, and cost-benefit KPIs. But on the other side, you hit the borderlands. These are the incommensurate values. This is exactly where the metric system completely breaks down. We're talking about things like a unique team culture, deep human relationships, pristine environments, or human dignity. The research defines incommensurables as categories of value that are socially unique. With these things, making trade-offs or comparing them to other metrics isn't just tricky, it's seen as a failure of transitivity, or sometimes even abhorrent. True incommensurables like a genuine friendship or a unique cultural identity lose their meaning and their integrity the very second we try to make them interchangeable with a standard KPI. Consider this really profound historical example from the research. An economist was brought in to evaluate a proposed dam. He easily quantified the construction costs, but then he actually tried and failed to invent a dollar price for the recreation of river tubing. But the bigger issue, the dam threatened the ancestral land of the Yavapai residents. For the Yavapai, their land was a constitutive incommensurable. It was tied directly to their very identity. But the rational decision models of the bureaucrats tried to force this sacred identity into an incredibly inappropriate monetary metric. And the result? Massive conflict. Because the bureaucrats were trying to quantify the unquantifiable. For you as a manager, ignoring these incommensurables creates massive corporate pitfalls. If you push metrics into intimate or highly specialized spheres of your work, you risk totally overlooking unique, unquantifiable skills. You erode trust by treating your team members like interchangeable data points. You create deep, sometimes aggressive resistance when you try to quantify a team's sacred values. And ultimately, you falsely equate qualitative differences with quantitative ones, which means you entirely miss the soul of your organization. Section 5. Becoming a mindful manager. How we can use metrics responsibly. To do this, we need to start by gently challenging our obsession with data-driven decisions. We need to recognize the illusion of objectivity. Every single metric you use is built on a foundation of human interpretation and subjective choices. Commensuration is an inherently interpretive and deeply political process. The next time someone hands you a sleek new dashboard, remember, someone else decided exactly what data to include and what crucial context to completely discard. So, what do? Here are 3 actionable steps for mindful management. First, recognize the context you're discarding. When you look at a KPI, ask yourself, what story is this number missing? Second, identify and protect your team's incommensables. Figure out what is truly sacred to your team's culture and flat out refuse to reduce it to a spreadsheet. Protect it. And third, understand that your metrics will alter behavior. Be incredibly careful about what you measure because your team is definitely going to optimize for that metric, sometimes at the total expense of your actual goal. You have to balance your formal, data-driven rationality with real empathy and local knowledge. This leaves us with the ultimate challenge for any modern leader. I want to leave you pondering this provocative question. What vital information are you discarding to make your numbers work? Next time you open up a dashboard or sit down for a performance review, remember the hidden architecture of your metrics. Don't let the numbers manage you. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this completely changes how you look at your next spreadsheet.